Good afternoon. I'm James Hill. This is my proposal for standardizing police officer response to mental health crises. A little bit about me, so you know why I know what I'm talking about. Got 8 years law enforcement experience as a patrol officer. I am certified through TCOL as a mental health officer, and I'm a psychology major currently at Texas A&M in Kingsville. So what is TCOL? Let's start by defining what TCOL is. TCOL is the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, and they regulate and oversee all law enforcement related entities in the state of Texas. So not just peace officers, they also regulate dispatchers, corrections officers, everything law enforcement related, they control and regulate. So when we talk about police officers, for our purposes, we're going to be talking about Texas. I don't know how, New York, Wisconsin, all those different agencies handle their mental health crisis. But in Texas, whenever I say police officer, I'm talking about Texas peace officers. And Texas peace officers, they're, your highway patrol, city officers, county deputies, TABC, school resource officers, anything of that nature. So the role of law enforcement has changed drastically throughout history. So previously, your law enforcement officers, they'd walk their beat, patrol their area, deter crime, arrest offenders, investigate crimes. That was it. Now, presently, along with patrolling, deterring crime, arresting offenders, and investigating crimes, we're also called on to conduct our welfare checks. Welfare checks are, somebody calls in, they're like, I haven't spoken to so-and-so in about a week. They normally call me. I just want to make sure they're okay. We go check, make sure they're okay. Civil matters, you divorce your wife, husband, spouse, whatever. You want to go pick up your clothes without risking, getting into a fight or injuring them or, being injured yourself. You call us, we'll do a standby while you collect your things. And then mental health crises. So your suicidal subjects, your schizophrenics that are out there shouting at the heavens, we respond to those as well. So in my introduction, I also mentioned that I'm a Texas mental health officer certified through TCOL. What is a mental health officer? So a mental health officer, they differ when you're talking about, the size of the agency. In larger agencies like San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Austin, those agencies, they're big enough that they can have strictly mental health officer divisions. And those are the ones that'll show up to those suicidal, schizophrenic, PTSD sufferers, and they go and handle those situations, and that's it. That's their job. Your smaller agencies like, your Kingsville PD or Alice, our area, along with, handling all those mental health crises, you're also still going to be a patrol officer. So you still have to respond to those burglaries, robberies, thefts, calls of that nature as well. But our role is basically that we're going to be liaisons between our department and mental health facilities, finding, the assistance or the resources to get these people treated. So what's a mental health crisis? As I stated earlier, mental health crisis, that's your suicidal, schizophrenics, your PTSD sufferers, even, normal autistic people. If they go out there and get lost in the middle of the street, we have to show up and provide them with assistance. So talking about mental health crisis, why is that a problem today? Well, in today's world, mental health is on the rise. Mental health crisis, mental health illness, it's on the rise. So this is showing back in 2019. I don't know if that's actually circling or not. This is back in 2019. In 2019, you had your 1 out of 5 adults experiencing mental health illnesses, so about 25%, right? 18% living with anxiety, 7% with major depression. Then you go into your juveniles, 1 out of 5 youths between 13 and 18, mental health conditions. 37% of students with mental health conditions, 14 and up, they end up dropping out of school. Then 70% end up in juvenile justice systems when they have mental illnesses. So that was back in 2019. In today's world, or at least back in 2023, anxiety, depressive disorders, those were the big ones back in 2023. So 18 to 24, you had about 50% of your people experiencing anxiety, depressive disorders. And this is all throughout the United States. It's not just in Texas. I couldn't find one directly related to Texas. 25 to 49, you got 38%, then 50 to 64, 29%. When you're comparing your 1 out of 5 adults. And I messed up on the math earlier, 20%. 20%. And now we're at 32% in 2023. So what changed? Post-COVID. Your big three post-COVID: anxiety, depression, substance abuse. Obviously, during COVID, you had your fears about contracting COVID and dying. It was all over the news that if you get it, you're going to die. Isolation. We were in lockup for a while. Isolation leads to depression. You don't have your friends. You don't have your family to talk to. You end up getting depressed. And then substance abuse. You're depressed. You're feeling anxious. People start self-medicating by drinking, taking, things like Xanax, and end up, getting addicted to them, and now they're abusing them. So our current response in a mental health crisis, we get the call for service, we show up, we start interviewing family, friends regarding the person's behavior. Using those questions and answers, we determine if they're a danger to themselves or not. If they're not a danger to themselves at that time, recommend an outpatient service, like your Coastal Plains. Here in South Texas, we got Coastal Plains. If they are a danger, then we have to detain them, contact a judge, seek mental health warrant, keep them detained without violating their rights. That's what a mental health warrant is for. Similar to an arrest warrant, except this is dealing with medical issues. So contact a community mental health agency like Coastal Plains, as I said, and they're going to start calling around, locating an intake facility. While they're doing that, dealing with all that, we're still trying to get that mental health warrant signed by a judge. Hopefully we have one on call. If we don't have one on call, then, we can't get one signed, and there's not a whole lot we can do in that situation. We'll also take them to the emergency room, to the ER. We have crisis spawn here in Alice. I think Kingsville has a crisis spawn, so we'll take them to that emergency room and get a medical clearance. Medical clearance just means they don't have any medical conditions, which will become a problem once they're inside the facility. Things like diabetes, high blood pressure, we just want to make sure they survive the trip, right? And then, assuming the judge does sign the warrant, and assuming there is an available space to take them, we'll transport that person to the intake facility. If there isn't an available space, then we're going to be waiting with that person until a space becomes available. And that could take anywhere from 8 hours to 24 hours to 48 hours. And that just means an officer has to spend his whole time waiting with that person until something becomes available. So best case scenario, we don't run into any hiccups. There's a space available. That whole process could take about 6 hours. So the problems with our current response, some of our officers have lack of training. I'll go into detail with that later. Availability. So when that mental health caseworker is able to show up, the one from Coastal Plains, and then we have a lack of patrol officers, so not enough manpower to actually, handle that person, handle that situation. And then lack of resources. So state-funded hospitals. Over here on the right, I guess, of the slide, I have a map showing the available state-funded hospitals here in Texas. So here in Texas, state-funded hospitals, those are the ones that have the little green dots. The stars, those are supported living centers. I couldn't find a map without them, so this is what we have to deal with. So around here in our area, there's no green dot. We don't have an available state-funded hospital. So whenever we go to Corpus, transporting somebody, that's going to be a private hospital. And I'll go into detail later about why that's a problem. So 11 hospitals all throughout the state of Texas. Texas has a population of about 30 million. Each hospital can support about like 180 people, like 180 patients, I should say. So 180 times 11, that'll get you somewhere in the range of what, 190? No, 1,900. Not enough. So lack of training, as I was saying earlier. Basic Police Officer Certification Academy. So most academies, they just require about 40 hours of CIT. CIT is your crisis intervention training. So your crisis intervention, that trains you how to respond to these certain calls. 40 hours for your whole academy. Academy runs about 6 months, 40 hours of that. Not good. Basic peace officers. As you're going through your career, after you get out of the academy, you have what's called continuing education requirements. So your basic peace officers, they have 8 hours of CIT, crisis intervention training, that they have to go through every 4 years. So looking at this thing here, your 4-hour training cycle, if you do not have an immediate proficiency certificate, crisis intervention training. So if you don't have your intermediate proficiency, as you go through your career, you can get to a higher certificate. You got your basic, that's where you start off. That's where all peace officers start off, your basic. You go up to intermediate, advanced, masters. So after intermediate, you're no longer required to have any crisis intervention training. So we're going to look at what's required to get your intermediate. So your intermediate certificate, let's get rid of all these. So to get your intermediate, you have to have a certain number of years of service and then training hours, or if you have an associate's or any military experience, all you need are years of service. You no longer need any training hours. So an intermediate, a normal Texas peace officer, after their 2 years of service, let's assume they have a bachelor's degree, they automatically go up to an intermediate. So after 2 years of service, they can no longer be required to have any kind of crisis intervention training. So you have your senior officers out there, the ones that have been like 10 years of service, 15 years of service, and they're running around, and the last time they went through any kind of crisis intervention training was, maybe 8-10 years ago. So the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what all the psychologists, all the psychiatrists, everybody that treats mental health, this is what they go based off of to diagnose, not to treat, but to diagnose. So this thing updates every 10 years at least. And then in between each full update, they have their little revisions. So right now we're on the DSM-5 TR or something like that. So alluding to what I was saying before about your senior officers that haven't had any training in the last like 10, 12, 15 years, this thing's already had a full update. Not counting how many revisions it went through before that full update. So this thing's more updated than your normal Texas peace officers. Sorry, my cat just went across the desk. The lack of officer availability. As I was saying earlier, 6-hour process, best case scenario. That's taking a patrol officer off the street. So the officer's not available to deter crime. He's not available to respond to any kind of service calls like your burglaries, your robberies, your thefts, and the town is left underprotected. Lack of resources. Your mental health caseworkers, a lot of them, they respond, they're on call. Like after hours, you have one on-call mental health caseworker. They could be responding from anywhere. Normally here in Alice, they're going to be responding from like Corpus or Rockport, Portland, anything like that. And they're only going to respond if that person that we're dealing with is already detained and in a secure environment. So we go out to their house, we get called for a suicidal subject, we go out to their house. Mental health caseworker isn't going to show up until we have that person detained and at our police department. And then intake units, as we said earlier, there's only 11 of them for the whole South Texas, or not whole South Texas, for the whole state of Texas. The whole 30 million person population is only serviced by 11 state-funded hospitals. The one in South Texas in our area, Coastal Bend area, Coastal Plains area, the one in Corpus, it's not state-funded. It's a private hospital. So it's like they can deny taking anybody in for any number of reasons, and we can't do anything about it. And they rarely have beds available anyway. So how do we change it? How do we standardize the system? What I'm proposing is we change TCOL mandated training. We fund some on-call mental health professionals, and it increase the availability of intake mental health units. So how do we change training? So this right here is the current calendar for a 40-hour crisis intervention training. So we have a whole block in the morning, first day, about 3 hours of just welcomes, basic understanding, defining the problem, defining what a crisis is, and the origins of the training. That's about, like I said, 3 hours of time wasted, in my opinion. Then we have guest speaker block. We have a block for a guest speaker there. We have a block for a guest speaker there. All those blocks are about an hour and a half, so you have 4.5 hours of just guest speakers. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Jasper. And guest speakers, they don't really cover anything important, in my opinion. They're going to come in and talk about, hey, you know, here's my history, here's what I know about it, and that's about it. They don't give us anything useful. They don't give us anything we can take back to our department and utilize while we're out there. They're just there to kill time, I guess. And then we start looking, and we got Unit 5 here, which is talking about information gathering. Like I said, you have to interview them, see if they're a danger to themselves and danger to the public. Then you have your 3-point assessment. That's where you use to determine if they are a danger. Your rapport, you're building up, you know, a relationship with the person you're supposed to be there to help. And then LEAPS. I'm not entirely sure what LEAPS is, but it's in there. So this section right here, the stuff you're going to use to detain the person and to get them help, get them treatment, is only about a 4-hour block. And then over in this area, accessing local resources. That's an important section right there. That's what you're going to use to get them the treatment. So what are the big three after COVID? You got your depression, your anxiety, and your substance abuse. Depression and anxiety, they're going to have different treatments altogether than substance abuse. Substance abuse, what are you going to do? You're going to go into rehab, stuff like that. So how do you find the right resources for those individual problems? Your PTSD, your veteran who fought in Iraq or Afghanistan, they're now suffering from PTSD, they're having flashbacks. What treatment are you going to get them? What resources are you going to suggest them? So having access to your local resources, that's a big section. Or it should be bigger. Right here, they only have it covering about an hour, hour and a half. So take some of this wasted time, cut that out, and expand it. Expand sections like that and sections like that. The stuff that's actually going to help the officer out there on the street. So what's the purpose? What's the whole goal for improving the training? You're decreasing or minimizing your liabilities. So we're not taking somebody violating their rights when they weren't in a crisis to begin with. preventing injury to civilians and officers. You build up that rapport better. You start your de-escalation techniques. You get better training on how to deal with the people, then you're going to prevent injuries. You're not going to have to fight everybody you come into contact with. Because not a lot of people like to be detained and taken somewhere that's not their house. So they like to fight. You're increasing the patrol officer availability. Instead of just going detaining everybody and waiting for a mental health caseworker to get there, that officer is going to be able to say, okay, he's not a danger to himself. He's not a danger to everybody else. He doesn't need to be detained. We'll leave him out there. Just get him a resource, right? And then increasing the availability of treatment to all civilians. Like I said, different problems require different resources. So you're going to be able to go out there and explain, okay, you need to go talk to this person. This person will get you the help you need. So you're increasing their treatment. So open up funding for mental health professionals. My proposal, get mental health professionals, mental health officers into every department. So I got over here suggested training for them to go through, proper restraint training, handcuffing, de-escalation training, have them certified as mental health officers, obviously, under TCOL guidelines, because that's what they're going to be working under. Procedures for mental health warrants, and then training in basic psychology and therapy. Why is training in basic psychology and therapy important? Because while you're there waiting for resources or waiting to take them to the hospital, you can start, helping them, de-escalating them, making them understand, why they need to go and get help in the beginning. So over here, for all that training and then to fund an opening for a mental health officer in a department, because a lot of the problem is those smaller departments, they don't have the funds to have this person in there. It's like they get their funds and they're like, okay, we need more people, we need more manpower, more officers out there on the streets. So having the state fund a spot in every small agency is my proposal. Estimated cost is about $52,000 to fund that person and get them the training for 1 year. That's, kind of a high range, high estimate. So what I propose is taking the funds from the OLS budget. OLS, the Operation Lone Star, that's their border security for Texas. So they were budgeted back in 2023, 2022 maybe, $495 million for border security. So 1% of that budget, 1% of that 495 million, you could get a mental health officer in at least 100 departments. And that'll start helping the problem. So the purpose of them, faster response time, they're going to be on call, officers not going to be stuck there waiting for them to show up because they're already going to be out there. And they're going to be shouting from hopefully that city, unless they decide they're going to move somewhere else. So it keeps the patrol officers available to perform their job functions like those burglaries, robberies, thefts that I spoke about earlier. And then those mental health professionals, they're going to have better training and they're going to be able to provide better treatment for the civilians. And everyone's happy. Then your state-funded hospitals. Like I said, we have 11 of them in the whole Texas. Startup cost for one of these hospitals, upper range, the better facilities, the higher class ones, you got about $3.5 million. You can start one up yourself. So going back to that Lone Star budget, the border security budget, $495 million for border security. You take 10% of that budget and you can build yourself 10 of these facilities throughout Texas. Hopefully they would put them in the smaller regions, smaller areas, lower income areas. Or I guess rural is a good word for it. Border security is important, but along with border security, we need to start taking better care of our people that are actually here in this state. 10%, 10 facilities. More hospitals obviously means better treatment. So to conclude, mental health problem is expanding. State needs to rise with it. They need to rise to meet that problem. Most small law enforcement agencies, they're not capable of keeping up with the increased demand of mental health services, so the state needs to provide assistance, and they can do that by getting us better resources and better training. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for taking the time to review this, and I hope you have a wonderful day.